Well, we're very happy this evening to have with us Miss Sandra M. Castillo and Eating Moors and Christians. But to give us a proper welcome, another great friend of Books and Books, the author of Dubwise and many others. Please welcome poet Jeffrey Phillip.
Good evening. The past is never dead. It's not even the past, is one of the better known quotes from William Faulkner's Requiem for a Nun. This, I believe, expresses the essence of Sandra Castillo's poetry, the work of a highly intelligent mind trying to grapple with the complexities of Cuban history, Fidel Castro, and Cuban-American life in Miami. As she stated in Blaming Fidel from her first collection of poems, My Father Sings to My Embarrassment, swallowed by the blue static of the metal particles, 90 miles of blue, he, Fidel Castro, is water and distance and time. La historia de una isla, a nanosecond in this, our Cuban life, dressed by actions and consequences we do not know how to accept. For anyone who knows Sandra, this was and is an untenable proposition. And so in her second book, Eating Moors and Christians, she uses the trope of black beans and white rice, a staple of the Cuban diet, to explore the challenges of race, culture, and history. But Eating Moors and Christians is also much more than that. The collection represents a freedom that was only hinted at in My Father Sings to My Embarrassment, in which we witness a young poet who, although she knows she has a strong voice, is still testing her range. In Eating Moors and Christians, Sandra has broken out of the mold. Her voice is confident, and she is no longer intimidated by a past which could have kept her a prisoner. The transformation is remarkable. In this collection, we find a poet who has expanded her craft and technique to include the use of Spanglish and Spanish, and she adds depths to the characters we first met in My Father, such as Tia Estela, Abuelita Isabel, Tio Armando, her father, and of course her mother, whom I suspect passed on the love of photography to her, which, as Sandra explains in La Lisa, Marianao 15, La Habana, Cuba, I photograph it all with Catholic grief or mosaic of sin and guilt. And if I am permitted, I would add one word to that line, cariño. Damas y caballeros, hermanas y hermanos, brothers and sisters, it is my pleasure to introduce a remarkable poet whom I'm lucky enough to call my friend, Sandra Castillo.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you to Books and Books. And thank you to Jeffrey for that lovely introduction. Really appreciate it. I feel the same way about you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read some poems from My Father Sings to My Embarrassment, but I'd like to begin with the book that this is the launch of, which of course is Eating Moors and Christians. And thank you for clarifying that it's not about cannibalism. I've gotten some interesting Facebook questions about that. So anyway, if you don't know me, and I know that some of you don't, I was born in Cuba, and I lived there for the first 8 years of my life. And so in many ways, I am a child of the revolution, a Cold War baby, if you will. And those were really intense years, as Jeffrey has referenced, and they kind of stay with you. And my uncle was a photographer, and he sort of documented our Cuban life by taking photographs of anything and everything. And so I learned to think about our life as sort of these black and white snapshots. So I sort of use that as structure for a lot of the poetry. So it's about Cuban history, but it's also about being frozen in time and sort of grappling with issues of history and memory. So that's sort of to kind of clue you in a little bit about the collection. This first poem is called Peluquera. So in the early 1960s, after Fidel declared himself victorious, the revolution had won January 1st, 1959. People who were loyal to the revolution, particularly Afro-Cubans from Oriente, moved into Havana, and some of them became our neighbors. And this is one such poem. Mumuta was my mother's hairdresser, and she actually inherited a home down the street from our house that she got when a man who left, people left the neighborhood because they either came to Miami, fleeing Fidel, or they met an uglier death. So as a way of explaining this poem, I wrote a little obituary, and it explains how she came to inherit this particular property. So, obituary. Colonel Fermín Cowley, the architect of Las Pascuas Sangrientes, December 24th, 1956, for whom Batista wept, comandante del ejército, who hunted down revolutionaries in la costa de Oriente, left their bodies in repartos named Las Delicias on Nochebuena, was gunned down, bullet to the chest, inside a hardware store in Holguín, Peluquera. I'm sorry, I seem to have a crying eye. My apologies. Okay. Mumuta moved from Oriente into Fermín Cowley's house at the end of Calle 158, La Habana, after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, and became peluquera de barrio in La Lisa, where news spread que Mumuta peina. And she was creative too. In a time of escaseces, she knew how to use beer to stiffen hair, how to brush it around the large pink curlers. And where there was no beer, she could use sugar and water, applying the sticky substance that ran down her fingers, her black fingers, to tease and shape the lives of her vecinas into bucles or moños, and how if she ground perrubia into a powder, mixed it in alcohol, poured it into her invento, como bendición, she could pumped it into a thin mist, como bendición, over the heads of the women who came to her. She could hold their lives in place. Okay. I'm serious, I have like this crying jag here. Okay. I apologize. All right, so I started going to Cuba in 1994, and I know that's not a popular thing to say in Miami where things are touchy, but luckily things are opening up a little bit, so I think I can say that. So my mother and I started going in 1994, and it was really a pilgrimage about understanding who we were, where we came from, and it was also about visiting history, particularly in an island that had been closed off to us since we left in the summer of 1970. So, I thank my mother for being my passport, and she's here. I don't know how she'll feel about me reading this poem, but it's a prose poem, and it's about my parents and what I know of my parents when I was growing up. So. This is called This Is No Love Story. My mother stands at the edge of El Barrio Chino, La Habana Vieja, entre rayo, cuchillos y dragones, between the 4-story Friendship Arch donated by Beijing y los escombros, the unpainted portales, colonial squalor, where the descendants of Cantonese contract workers who came who came to the island to work in cane fields collect. The old woman, I'm sorry. It's like, gosh, okay. I think it would help if I went like this. So just pretend I'm not doing that. Oh my goodness. Okay. You're being nice to me. Okay, I appreciate that. All right. Okay. It's the light, I think. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna do it like this. All right. I'm telling you, it's my eyes tearing up. All right. So I'm gonna do this again. Okay. This is no love story. My mother stands on the edge of El Barrio Chino, La Habana Vieja, entre rayo, cuchillos y dragones, between the fourth-story Friendship Arch donated by Beijing y Los Escombros, the unpainted portales, colonial squalor, where the descendants of Cantonese contract workers who came to the island to work in cane fields collect. The old woman who asked to be photographed with her hairless Asian dog amidst red lanterns, herbal medicine shops, Chinese dragons, a comparsa de dragones, of Oriental chefs in starched white uniforms and 6-foot-tall hats, the smell of boiled pork and sewage wafting over generations of sweaty men chain smoking on the edge, dangling off the past in front of the Hotel New York, the windows boarded up, its signs hanging precariously above the remains like an oracle. Here, under a portentous sky, the year of the rat, my mother, purple rosary in hand, spent her wedding night crying into the future, un monte de sombras, as if she could look into the distance, the days ahead, splashing against the seawall, el malecón beyond El Prado, and with a kind of terror, watch herself step into a Guantanamo-bound bus, arrive voiceless to life as revolution, a rented room between the GE plant my father guards and El Rio Guaso, the matorrales beyond the night where the rebeldes hide, waiting for nightfall. Kitchen trenches in which she crawls to sleep alone when el tirotreo begins, while across the street my father mixes pólvora and vodka, liquid courage, in shot glasses, as Fidel's columns move into Santiago, Raúl's into Orientes, Camilo's into Pinal del Rio, and Che into Las Villas. But in the bare light of todo aquello, my rum-soaked father, dressed in his guerrera and bravado, drinking bar to bar in rebel-held Guantanamo, losing his gun, dragging my mother across Oriente, the landscape like a shadow, bragging like some gamecock. Esto no va a durar, vamos a acabar con ellos. As if Batista's forces had not begun to surrender. As if Batista had not already orchestrated a New Year's departure, complete with an 18-piece kangaroo luggage set lined with $12 million and an island life off the coast of Madeira. Dressed in the black and white and red colors de la Revolución, the July 26 movement flag my tío Casimiro hung over the balcony of his Havana life, though few will admit it now. My mother, la turista en la arquitectura del pasado, centers herself in the shade of the old hotel, diffusing the light, the shadows. Aim here, she says. Then she waits for the click that will hold her amidst open doors, open lives, Chinese markets and street vendors selling goose eggs, lychees down the street, Calle Salud, where the first mangoes grew, where Fidel's photograph still stands, Calle Dragones, número 311, entre Rayo y San Nicolás, 47 years later, inverse square law, caught by the flash, a close-up, the black and white of permanence. He fills the frame, the light falling on the left side of his face, and eats arroz frito, drinks Coca-Cola, chopsticks in hand. He is talking and laughing, como si la vida no estuviera marcada con contradicciones. So that's sort of like a weird preview of like my mother's honeymoon. Perverse. I grew up in La Lisa, you know, and so the title of this poem, part of it is the actual physical address of the neighborhood My grandmother bought this house in 1959, and I spent the first 8 years of my life in this house. And I have a near photographic memory, so I mean, I can close my eyes and see everything for as far as I ever walked on all sides. So, anyway, thank you, Luke. All right, so this is called La Lisa, Marianao 15, La Habana, Cuba. We sit on the front porch of my childhood, our old home, número 15,812, Avenida 89, entre la 158 y la 160, in the house my grandparents bought when the world was so much smaller. On the same wrought iron chairs my mother sat in 1961, her hands on her stomach as if embracing Jorge, her first child, whose death would come in the midst of history, la crisis de octubre. Peralta still sits next door, and from his rocking chair he waves to me, sends regards to my father, like we were still neighbors, like we still lived here. My cousin Alina, who last stood before me when she was 6 years old, wears the same look she did in those black and white photographs of those years. And Panchito, one of our old neighbors, is retelling a story of how my sister crawled out into the backyard patio and fell in the well, like nothing has happened here since 1966. I photograph it all with Catholic grief, a mosaic of sin and guilt, the slow blur into the past, mourn the loss, todo lo perdido, in this, the city of my dreams, where everything and nothing has changed. So clearly I write a lot about my family, so I shouldn't point them out in the audience. There's a Chilean poet named Omar Lara, and I read one of his poems. I have this fascination with Chile. And I read one of his poems, and it was like a selfie with words. And I thought, wow, what a really neat idea. So I looked at one of the photographs of myself, because I do use photography to talk about the past, you know, those kind of snippets, of time frozen forever for us. And I did my own version. So the poem is called Photograph. And of course, since I got the idea from Omar Lara, I've written with respect for Omar Lara. Photograph 1. I am the 6-year-old in the center, the timekeeper in the Havana blue dress, waving as if to say, adios, Havana. The birthday girl sitting on the lacquer black coffee table, mother dragged out to El Portal for the afternoon, 2 years before we lose everything. But there's no way of knowing any of this. Estio Alberto measures the existing light, the distance between me and the inevitable, mapping our lives with photographs. 2. The red and green croto plants framing the shot, Teroina's house behind me, its wooden green Caribbean windows shut tight, a skeleton inside. Diango singing between our lives about geography or distance, about what you cannot forget, the color of grief, language pressed between flesh and nostalgia as she wastes away from love or cancer, the past lost or unreachable. 3. Here, in the afternoon, I cast my own shadow, myself as the other, the dark daguerreotypes de mis antepasados, cafeteleros, españoles, isleños, generaciones perdidas, not yet lost, destroyed into fragments, the mosaic pieces of the past, our ancestry, along with the passport pictures de mi abuela Isabel, mi abuelito Leopoldo, that might expose those who choose to stay behind, imagining that they will always be themselves here, where everything is familiar, and that we will never return to this life, this long summer house, so haunted with whispers, so filled with the scent of olive oil and garlic, to find how little survives. So as you can see, I'm having eyeglasses issues. So thanks for humoring me and bearing with me with that. I'm gonna have to pay you to follow me around, say stuff like that to me. All right, so my aunt, I've written a lot about family, and recently I did this presentation at St. Thomas University, and somebody said to me, how does your family feel about you writing and telling these stories? And so I'm going to tell you what I said. I think that the stories belong to me as well because I was there and I experienced them. So this is for my aunt. She lived in Almendares, where I spent a lot of time with my cousin. And this is the title of this poem, and it's called Almendares for my tia Estela. Blood puddles on the Spanish white floor, like a secret no one talks about, though everyone feeds it like imagination, with hushed conversations translating into fear, into memories I am told were never real. The rooms roared like the morning lion that hid in the closets of the upstairs apartment that you rented to a woman who could not understand why dawn found her undergarments scattered on the steps of her life, a display of familiarity or intimacy, and patterned echoes yawned like the voices trapped between the clavicles of the past, or opaque breaths calling us to maids' quarters long sealed, sounded like the wind between the caves of the underworld we thought would swallow us. Into darkness we opened, looking for sounds, for hands folding into knocks, for mouths moving into vowels, into words, for someone invisible who woke you to midnight weight pressing upon you with the invisible thrust of unfamiliar desire until you could feel the invisible moving inside you, and a hot breath never your own, equaling pain, dividing fear into the stories that kept us looking for what we never found. She used to say her house was haunted. I really do feel like I grew up in that house. And the first year that I went there with my mom, we had my cousin drive us around, and we're driving around in a 1955 Chevy because, you know, Cuba's kind of stuck in the 1950s. So it was totally cool to be driving around the past in the appropriate car, you know, 55 Chevy. And my mother was a little weary, but I meant what I said. I have a near photographic memory, so we're driving by trying to find the house. And I told my mother I would recognize that house anywhere. And so she didn't believe me. So we turned the corner, and I said, stop the car. She lived here. I know she did. So we got the driver to stop, and my mother said, I'm not getting out of the car. I think you're wrong. I said, all right, you stay here. I'm going. So I knocked on the door, and this woman opened the door, and I said, I know you don't know me, but my aunt used to live here, and I would really like to have you let me come inside. So she did the 20 questions, right? So she opened the door about this much, and she said, who was your aunt? Who was she married to? How many children did they have? So apparently I answered all the right questions, because when she was done with that, she asked me for the last Moline who lived in that house. And so I told her, and she goes, come on in, look around, stay as long as you like. He left this house to me. So the poem that appears in the Eating Moors and Christians is the past poem about that house. So this one sort of encompasses the visit after I've already been, right? Circa 1994. So in Almendares. From the passenger window of a black 1955 Chevy, I see it. Tia Estela's house. The yard is covered with orange petals, a flamboyant blooming against the flaking stucco, layers of neglect in this museum of nostalgia. I beg Pedro to pull over, pointing to the house where in dreams Abuelita Isabel sits on a crowded couch in that living room with the black and white checkered floor, a puddle of blood at her feet. Sitting on the tile, I knock on the front door of my childhood, afraid of the past, the house and its secrets, the darkness that held Tia Estela down with the weight of history. A woman in a white house dress as thin as tracing paper answers the door. Too many years in my throat, I repeat the small details of our lives, a password that allows me to follow her down the corridor that opened to all those rooms that housed our fears. Afraid to ask her about the hauntings, I struggle with the past, the unspoken darkness that made us believe in a continent of evil. Instead, I tell her about the house, what it used to look like before the revolution partitioned it, divided it into 6, knowing that beyond memory, my Cuba no longer exists. So that's my little follow-up poem. There's something really interesting about visiting a place where nothing and everything has changed, and nothing I say could really sort of get that idea across, because while it's frozen in time, it's not the time that you left. So visiting always feels like, I don't know, some weird kind of out-of-body experience, if not like time travel. So anyway. I teach freshman composition. Sometimes, if I'm lucky, I'm allowed to teach creative writing, but mostly I teach history. And some years back, I had a student in my class, and I gave this assignment. I said, tell me the story of your life so far. And she wrote this wonderful, wonderful essay. And sometimes students don't realize what really terrific writers they are. And I was so taken with her story that it didn't seem enough to give her an A, so I wrote her a poem too. So this is for her, and her name was Jenny. So to Jenny, on peering into her life, I really felt like I understood where she was coming from. So thus the poem. To Jenny, I see you, not as you stand before me, so full of language threatening to spill from you, a silver blue luminous substance the page of cups might carry, in love, in a gold chalice. But as a child, I might have held on that island, when we might have become anyone other than ourselves. You are the sound you say your father carries, a beat in the heart of an African drum that seduced him with the thunder of Chango. The red and blood of earth, a flesh-green guava growing inside you, its seeds on the tips of your fingers like islands, like memories, becoming leaves, their veined undersides, becoming maps, palm lines, bridges, where the sound of water collects the past and a blue bucket of memory, where my tío Machuco stands, with childhood sandwiches I ate, sitting on the cold terrazzo, leaning against the southwest red of that couch that Tia Hilda discarded like a useless memory, when we were no longer voices in open rooms with connecting doors, when we were words on onion skin paper, as transparent as rewritten history or exile. So I have this ongoing thing with photographs. I mentioned my uncle, and my uncle became a political prisoner in Cuba. He was an amateur, strictly amateur, and he used to live with us. So this was one of those experiences that, while it was his, it was traumatic to me and to my family as well. So he lived with us, and in 1966, the military police came into our house and confiscated all the photos that he had ever taken, and he was taken prisoner because he was considered to be a spy, a member of the CIA. My uncle had no idea what the hell was going on, but he liked to go out and take photographs all the time, at night and during the day, and he accidentally took a photograph of a Russian ship at the port of Havana before Fidel was ready to talk about making nice with the Soviets. So anyway, so growing up, I feel like there were photographs all around me, and it enabled me to think about the past as these frozen snippets of time. And so it becomes this extended metaphor to talk about history as frozen images. Although I know memory doesn't work that way, when I think about Cuba, that's what it seems, sort of frozen in time, or in this case, in photographs. So, Artemisa, Pinal del Río, Cuba. Mapless, we arrive in the morning, like we had just been here yesterday. Emerita, my great aunt, is sweeping the terracotta floor of the second floor apartment she has lived in for 40 years. She watches me approach as if memory has failed her. Coño! She finally screams, recognizing my mother as herself, an audience behind us. Suspicious faces marked by salt and sun because we are tourists here, other, aquí, en nuestra tierra natal. We follow her to the sunniest room on the island, where her husband, Piloto, his skin as leathery as my grandfather, his clothes stitched or patched in the oddest of places, in the most peculiar of colors. Maria Antonia, Tio Machuco's daughter, her flaxen blonde hair, highlighting her dark facial hair. Primo Gerardo in military green, who takes my camera when I try to take him with me. A flash, a snap. No pictures, he says. No pictures in English, as if I might not have understood my first language. And his wife, the nurse with the wandering eye, they gather, my missing generations, convergence and continuity en una esquina de Artemisa. In my mother's land, her grandmothers before her, old at 40, raising 8 children in rural Pinar del Rio, the center of our lives, the past imperfect. Here, in this landscape of hard edges and perfect sorrow, where I know who I am, I measure distance with language and guilt, as our ghosts, the black and white faces of the past, spread out against a crocheted bedspread, ancestors with our last name, people I never knew, relatives no one recalls, though they have been passed down for generations, the membrane severed, the connection lost between the future y los acres del olvido, marcando mi vida sin pedir permiso. This is where I come from, a place that exists in photographs I never owned. Okay, so okay, so I'm just gonna do one from the actual arrival. So we came to Miami on the Freedom Flights, the Johnson administration Freedom Flights. It was an elaborate process. I don't know if anybody knows how that worked, but you had to be claimed from the United States. Documentation had to be provided from the United States. Somebody who was a U.S. citizen had to claim you from here, and then it was an elaborate process to come. So my tia Belia, may she rest in peace, actually enabled us all to come. She, nos reclamó, which is what the term was at the time. She claimed us all. And so we came a little bit at a time, unless you had sons. If you had sons, they were considered to be military age, so they couldn't come. So I always say I grew up with women because all the relatives that came only had daughters. So, women. All right. This poem sort of talks about the arrival. Men on the Moon. The year Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, the Aurelia, our mariner, sent us a picture of 9-year-old Norma, her hair pulled back, Apollo 11 inscribed on the white of her shirt. She stood against a peach-colored house, the green thickness of American grass and a turquoise sky, and smiled from the shade of a Florida palm tree. No longer was America just data. Airmail envelopes, shopping carts, stories about Tio Luis, who mother said had cut the surface of Lake Okeechobee with his body, with his gravel truck. She was cousin Norma. She was Men on the Moon. And I held on to that picture, as real as a recurring dream, and imagined myself scuffing the surface of Tia Belia's colored photograph, and like Armstrong, landing in a sea of tranquility. Later that year, Fina, our seamstress, made each one of us 2 dresses, and mother helped us give away our clothes, our toys, and kept us from talking about Norma and all those who had left before us. Okay, so Professor Glasses on. So I spent a couple of summers. My mother and I haven't been back to Cuba since 2006, but for a couple of years I kept going back. And true story, my sister will vouch for this, because she has said that she doesn't remember anything about having lived in Cuba, which always amazes me. And maybe my brain works differently, or maybe I was a weird kid who grew up, but I remember these things so vividly. And my cousins and my sisters will go, I have no recollection of that. Um, I don't remember that. Don't ask me that. And so, but my sister May says that the only thing she remembers about Cuba was being chased by chickens. And so, which is a kind of funny thing, you know, when you were born in the third world, there are chickens everywhere, of course. But she has this particular memory connected to being chased by them. And she wanted to know if it was something that she had dreamed, made up, in other words, or if it was a real experience, because it was the only little sort of kernel of the past that she actually had that was really, like, she felt that was her own, right? Anyway. So there's this really famous poem by William Carlos Williams, right? Because so much depends, right? Anybody know that poem? Yes, so much depends on, no? On the red wheelbarrow. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly right. I'm just testing you. Okay. All right, so this is my Cuban version to my sister. Okay. So, because so much depends on me finding the chickens. I promise my sister that I will keep looking year after year for something you only find here. The farm with the backyard coops amidst the vast landscape, the disembodied past, in this blood-red earth, the Cuban gallinas she still dreams about, traumatized by a dream, if not the white chickens, the pecked at the back of her 4-year-old legs, sending her running to my mother's skirt in another life before we were who we are. I didn't include this part in the poem because, you know, I kind of had this, oh, this works just like it is. But I really did, you know, year after year, asked any family member that we visited on the island, was my sister ever here? You know, do you have this memory too? And in the last year that my mother and I went in 2006, some distant relative said, oh my God, yes, she got chased by chickens. And so, so I was able to report that it was real. True story. True story. So, yeah, so kind of weird to say I kept going back to Cuba looking for chickens. I don't think I needed to go back that far, but I did. All right, so let's see. All right, just because this one references another poem. So when I was growing up, there was this photograph that was in the living room, and it was for my tío Gelasio, who died in 1955 of tuberculosis. I never knew him. He died before I was ever born. So when I went back to Cuba, I wanted to know what happened to the picture. And it turns out, you know, like everything else, it was just sort of passed down. So some other relative had my uncle. And so this poem is for him. This room at midnight. Tío Gelasio hovers over us in this formless darkness, this 10 by 16 room swelling with nostalgia. Forever 25, encased in glass, dark suit, white shirt, perfectly pressed, hair as black as any azawache. He smiles as if there were life between photographs. Taken by humidity, drowned from the inside. He never saw time stand still. Cuba caught, circa 1955, between history and sorrow. I stand at the window of this bruised life, the green pre-revolutionary fan, the skeletal remains, the damp bones of insomnia. Across the street, the neighbors, a former vaudeville act, fire eaters, plate spinners, acrobats, collect on the front porch of their lives. The women in colorless house dresses, the men in grime-colored boxers, and they sit on the edge of the precipice of this existence, like some bony coast in this country containing us all, haunted. So, so as you can see, I sort of deal with issues of history and memory. So I think this one kind of captures that idea. It's called The Dream, and there's an epigraph by Theodore Roethke, and it says, "Dark, dark, my light, and darker my desire. My soul, like some heaten, maddened summer fly, keeps buzzing at my sill. Which I am I?" The Dream, 1. Mother's version. Okay, my eyes no longer freaking out, so I can do this. All right. We walk past certain darkness to look into the lighted windows of closed shops until a ghost of a stranger, a shadow she cannot quite make out in the outline of night, pulls me to him, hands me a small silver knife. I turn to her, cut my chest, bleed red into the black night. 2. Mine. I dream my own darkness. Water is black. It connects us to land. I can swim through the oil black thickness and come up for air in Cuba, the country of memory, but only if I can hold my breath for longer than 2 minutes, the depth of night. I almost want to feel like, does anybody have any questions? Because I kind of threw a lot of history stuff your way, your general direction. Honest question. Feel free to say something. Anything? Nobody? No questions? Really? Huh? Yeah, you do? Shoot. Okay, go. Uh-huh. Okay. It was a pilgrimage. I get it. Okay. Sure. Sure. Hmm. Right. Yes. I do. I would say we're all suffering from cognitive dissonance, but it's a really good question. I mean, because our story is part of the exile experience, and oftentimes that's linked to when you arrived on the island, from the island rather. Did you grow up here? How much of a Cuban life did you actually have? So, like for my sisters, the first 4 years of your life, you don't really remember much of that. So they don't feel that yeah, except for the chickens, right? So they don't feel that linkage back to place. And so I think that for him, he's clearly grappling with the idea of roots and lostness of them, right, culturally. And so that's kind of really interesting, because I think that there is that desire to connect back to a kind of homeland, but I think part of the exile experience is feeling that sense that we don't really belong anywhere. And I don't think that you can ever really explain that to somebody who grew up in the same place, like they were born here and they're from here, because we will never really truly inhabit this place, and as much as I spent my life in the United States, I'm not from here. I have 8 years of my life that are, sort of, I don't know what to call them. They're just kind of there. It sort of exists disembodied from who I am as a person. But I think a lot of it has to do with coming to an understanding of how history shapes and defines us against our will. And I think that's as Cubans, and as Miami Cubans, I think that's what we struggle with. How do we grapple with history, and how do we get past it so we kind of know how it defined us, if that makes sense. I took a workshop class a couple years ago with Nick Flynn, who's primarily a memoirist, and I adore him. He's a poet, but so he gave us an assignment, a writing assignment on the very first day, and he said, "I want you to go home and write a 6-word biography, and come back, and we're gonna hash these out." And I thought, holy crap, wow, okay, that's kind of interesting. How do you do that? And then I thought about, those issues that you raised, and I thought, oh my God, this is kind of a no-brainer. I know this, without Castro, there is no me, right? And so in that sense, it's the same idea that I would have had a Cuban life had I stayed in Cuba, but that didn't happen. And so I'm here, this is who I am, but at the same time, I would not be the person that I am today without all those historical things having taken place that in essence contribute to the person that I am. So it's really hard to be a writer and not talk about issues related to history and memory, because a lot of it attempts to address those kinds of issues, those issues of liminality. And I think a lot of that comes through in exile literature, and not just what I try to write. I mean, I think all writers who are from someplace else in some way, shape, or form address that larger issue because it's a universal one of loss. So does that make sense? So anybody else? No? Nobody has a question? Seriously? Okay. All right. I don't know. How are we doing on time? How does this work? Somebody gonna tell me? Like they do at the Oscars, right? It's like we're done, right? You'll start to. Oh, I was wondering about that. Is that how it works? Cut the mic off, and then you're suddenly talking to no one in particular. Yeah. Please read some more. Okay. All right. So as a writer, in addition to sort of wanting to visit yourself, even though you're no longer on the island, there's also the thing about wanting to visit other writers who spend time and occupied space in Cuba, and of course, that means Ernest Hemingway. So, Hotel Ambos Mundos. Hotel Two Worlds, if you don't speak Spanish. All right, so it's a real place, which is kind of a curious name for the hotel. And of course, it's where Ernest Hemingway spent some time. So, Calle Obispo, número 53, esquina Mercaderes, Ciudad Havana, if anybody's interested in going. All right. It stands at the end of the street, jotting out of history, like a sad monument to the expatriate who left home to escape himself. Its marble floor so polished that it bounces afternoon glare onto my face, though I am indoors drinking foreign beer in a lobby full of German tourists. I ride the steel cage with the elevator man, the system of pulleys and levers, to the 5th floor, room 511, where Ernest Hemingway wrote, "For whom the bell tolls." There are ghosts here. A sparse room, empty corners, wordless spaces where doubts collect, like stubborn obstacles. A typewriter encased in glass, a twin-size bed facing La Bahía de La Habana. What matters is this: the ocean is green, the past is buoyant, and I know he would have preferred to drown. I push open the Caribbean windows in this landscape of sorrows and shadows, empty storefronts, mildewed tenements where elderly men bathe on balconies, con cubos of rainwater, to the smell of the sea, and fold his secret into my hand. Standing here, a shout away from La Bodeguita del Medio, un conjunto playing downstairs, singing about palmas and bohíos, mi tierra, familiar things. I know he is here, straddling La Pepa y el mar. So, I think that's one of his vulgar expressions, which I won't bother to translate, but that's how he talked about life. So, there are footnotes on the back of my book. I'll just leave that one to you. So, okay. Anyway, so. This one. I want to read a prose poem. Somebody asked me earlier before I started, do I write poems or do I write prose? I don't make those kinds of distinction. I think when you want to tell a story, the story sort of tells you what form it wants to be in. And so this is a prose poem because that's the way that the story enabled me to tell it. So, all right. So it's called Sleeping, Bathing, Eating, Dreaming in La Habana, Cuba. And it's divided into sections. So it looks kind of like this. So it's kind of like a prose poem. All right. Sleeping. Steam collects in the room above the kitchen where I lay, naked, sweat dripping down my face, neck, breasts, until I am lying in a salty puddle. The faceless pre-1959 fan with the exposed electrical wires hums, rattles, grinds, strains and stalls like the old engine whose parts have enabled it to exceed its shelf life, threatens to fall apart, fly across the room, or worse. I open the unscreened windows. Above the bed, looking for tropical breeze. I am, after all, on an island. From beyond the small woods, next door, La Soledad, beetles fly in. Cincindela vindicolis. In the dark, I pick their metallic green bodies out of my hair, wondering how anyone sleeps or fucks here. Out of nowhere, the rains come, drenching my face, the damp smell of earth filling the room, bathing. I buy bottled water at the Bio Caribe, a dollars only store where the cashiers linger on me. My camera, sunglasses, hat, watch, fanny pack, my purchases, 8 bottles of water, 2 6-packs of Coca-Cola, 2 6-packs of Heineken, a box of ice cream bars. And I'm screaming, tourist, capitalist, bourgeoisie. And I stand in the white tiled shower stall in my Miami bought chancletas and pour purified water no one drinks here to bathe, to wash away the day, thinking about the amoebas lining my cousin Alina's stomach. Eating. It's okay. Each little section stands alone. Eating. Though we sit in the dining room underneath the stairs, sort out the rice, discarded seeds, the tiny pebbles with which it was bagged, sent off to bodegas, where it was weighed and measured, divided, rationed into households, the precise amount each family is allotted by la libreta de raciones, which forces habaneros to barter trade in dark alleys, scoring food like junkies. We miss the green chard, the sliver of glass on which I slice my tongue over the white rice, the frijoles negros, and bleed all over my dinner. Dreaming. Inconsolable, I run through the streets of Havana, riddled with history and remorse, looking for myself. The blue defining balconies framing windows and doors, azulejos, the clinking sounds of milk bottles at the front door, 6 a.m., the MacArthur dairyman in his starched white uniform and hat like a paper boat, the gray uniforms of Aristide Viera 2 blocks away from our lives, the meriendas at 10 a.m., the pasteles de guayaba and 10-ounce bottles of Coca-Cola, the ordinary details of those years when the world seemed open to possibility. Here, the past reintroduces itself like some kind of litany, builds bridges to memory, inhabits us like a ghost, carries us beyond this impasse, through the streets, the ruins of this city like photographs, and tells us everything or nothing. Here in the Cuban darkness, I stand at the door of the past, keyless, locked out. All the windows are boarded up and we're all gone. And I, having finally fallen asleep, wake to the confused rooster on the tin roof next door, singing at 2 a.m. To say that traveling to Cuba is like a Fellini film would be an understatement. Has anybody ever seen a Fellini film? It's kind of like, like a weird surreal dream. Kind of feels like that. All right, so am I just one more? Okay, something like really short. All right, so sometimes I write about the revolution, and I thought I would write it from somebody else's perspective. And I don't know if anybody knows much about Camilo Cienfuegos. He disappeared. I'm not sure what the accepted story of his disappearance is, historically speaking, today, but his plane vanished. And as a kid, when I was in Cuba, on the anniversary of his death, we used to go to a malecón and drop white claveles in his memory, because he disappeared in the early years of the revolution. So he never saw the revolution become what it had become. So nobody ever talks about him much. Does anybody know who he was? Camilo Cienfuegos? Okay. All right. So this is his voice, and pretend I'm him, and he's narrating a dream, a very short dream, that he has about Fidel. Camilo Cienfuegos dreams of the revolution. I am moving through water in slow motion, as if backpedaling across the Caribbean, my boots filling with sand, catching the chain of the bicycle I ride alongside Ernesto, Fidel, far behind, yelling about the bottle of rum he has dropped into the waves he cannot see through. Cabrón, I yell, but he cannot hear me, as the waves have swallowed him whole. Okay, I think
Thank you,
that's
Sandra.
my Oscar moment, right? That's it. Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and I really appreciate everybody being here. Thank you to Books and Books, and thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So yes.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it. Also, don't forget, the books are for sale behind the counter. We also have Jeffrey, thank you for your introduction. We have his books for sale behind the counter as well. If you're watching online, don't forget to give us a call. We'll get a book signed for you. Sandra will be sitting right here signing, so as you rise, if you could fold your chairs and lean them up against the back, that would be appreciated, so we have some room in here. Thank you all so much for coming. Stick around. We got some live music outside, right out of the front counter.